Nightshade and his friends, as well as Blazefang, were all thoroughly confused, yet made no objections as Shade beckoned them to follow him. Spark, knowing that the Weavile wanted to speak with Blazefang most, kept pushing the Houndour roughly ahead of the others as all the bat Pokemon still remaining in the cavern watched them suspiciously. Blazefang diverted his attention to the ground, feeling every one of their gazes boring into him. Their suspicion and mistrust hung over him like an ominous dark cloud. Shade approached a group of odd-looking tall stalagmites, walking up to the rock formation from the side and seeming to vanish behind it. Redclaw and Nightshade exchanged perplexed glances, and the group hesitantly followed. Nightshade, who had approached the rock first, quickly realized that a wide tunnel was hidden behind the stalagmites, hidden almost perfectly from a distance. Motioning to the others to follow him, the Heracross walked into the dark opening. The others followed, the bat Pokemon leaving them and flying off into other tunnels. At first, it was pitch black, but no one dared to use a fire or electric attack for light in case the Weavile mistook it for a threat. There was no sign of the small Sneasel, and Nightshade guessed that she had gone into another cavern. The Heracross lowered his head when he felt his horn scrape against the roof of the tunnel, which was closer to the floor than it had been at the beginning of the rocky passageway, and he heard Redclaw mutter something in pain as his head struck against it. Then, all at once, the cavern got brighter. Nightshade noticed an opening to a big cavern up ahead, and the light coming from it seemed brighter than anything he'd seen in the cave so far. When the group stepped into the cavern, their eyes widened in amazement. Glittering gems of all sizes were embedded in the rock wall, from ceiling to floor. Several of the luminous crystals also jutted from the ceiling itself, casting soft light on the shimmering stones and making them glisten like diamonds. Looking up, Nightshade saw several massive stalactites reaching down from the roof of the cave, far above them like jagged fangs. He found it impossible to tell how big they really were from a distance, though they looked gigantic. "This way," Shade said calmly, and the Heracross quickly turned to follow the Weavile, his gaze passing over what looked like crude drawings made by Pokemon claws on one of the cave walls. They were led into a winding tunnel, lit by soft, multicolored light from numerous small crystals of various hues. In spite of the situation they were in, Nightshade had to admit that the sight was stunningly beautiful. The group passed a few small entrances to other tunnels, though they didn't have much time for a closer look at any of them. At last, Shade led them into a small cavern lit by crystals that glowed a soft white. Once he made sure that none of the other cave Pokemon were around to eavesdrop, the Weavile turned to the group of Pokemon in front of him, concentrating especially on Blazefang. His first question to the Houndour was direct and clear. "Where did you find the stone that gave you Shadow Flare?" Blazefang was taken aback, but a glare from Spark and Redclaw, he knew better than to do anything but tell the truth. "I found it by a bunch of rocks in the lands near my pack's territory," he answered. "It was by the large snow mountains. I didn't know what it was at the time. There were a bunch of ghost Pokemon who I guess were guarding it." His voice trailed off and he fell silent. "Ghost Pokemon?" Shade repeated in confusion, but decided to say nothing more on the matter. "Listen," he told Blazefang sternly, looking the Houndour fully in the eyes. "No matter what you think, no matter what urge possesses you, you must never use that attack under any circumstances. Understand?" "Look, I don't want to use it any more than you want me to," Blazefang replied hastily. "How many times have you used it?" Shade interrupted, fixing Blazefang with another piercing stare. "Twice," Blazefang muttered regretfully, still deciding to be truthful. "But I've resisted it since then. I realize that it's dangerous. Do you know anything else about for once should have been enough to figure it out," Shade shouted angrily. Blazefang recoiled in shock, and the Weavile's expression returned to one of calm. "I'm sorry," he muttered quietly, "but I don't know how to express how important it is that you never use the attack again." Spark couldn't resist the urge to speak up. He turned to Blazefang. "Yeah, Blazefang, so don't roast any more Scyther, all right?" He shot the Houndour a glare. Shade turned to look at the Jolteon, curious, Without saying anything to him, he looked at Blazefang again. Did any of your friends witness the forbidden attack? Look, Redclaw pointed out. We are not his friends. Blazefang glared at the Arcanine. Of course not, he growled. But we're not here to fight about that, are we? Shut up. Spark bared his fangs threateningly, and his fur turned to pointed spines that sparked with bright electricity. And you're not here to boss us around, the Jolteon cried. Quiet, Shade told Spark with another stern glance. Blazefang, he spoke in a quieter tone, looking into Houndour's confused red eyes. Do you know what will happen if you use your forbidden attack too many times? Blazefang thought for a moment, remembering what Wildflame had told him. It gets stronger, he stammered, hoping he was remembering right. It gets harder to control. Shade's serious look did not change. That's not all, he told the Houndour. Not only is this attack devastating to all it encounters, but use it one too many times, and you lose your mind. Blazefang stood frozen to the spot, trying to contemplate what exactly that would mean. He tried not to show it in his expression, but the thought absolutely mortified him. Shade seemed satisfied at how easily he had gotten through to the Houndour. When he spoke again, he addressed all 5 of the travelers. I warn you of this because only a season ago, somewhere near this place, the forbidden attack Death Freeze was used by an Ice-type Pokemon. No one knows how the Pokemon stumbled upon it, but luckily he was stopped before he was able to do much damage. However, those who stopped him knew they couldn't kill him. They had to keep him alive, though they realized the attack had changed him. He wasn't sane. From what I heard, the Pokemon who found him took him far away, having to use hypnosis or sleep powder anytime he showed signs of using the attack. I am sure that it is not what you want for your fate to be, he added with an almost sympathetic look at Blazefang. Wildflame, who had been listening carefully along with the others, looked horrified. So, there's someone out there who knows a forbidden attack and can't control it? She gasped. Then, it's only a matter of time before... When I last heard of this, the Pokemon was being kept under constant watch, Shade replied. The attack seems to be triggered easiest by anger, fear, or pain, most likely by threat of physical attack. They are doing all they can to prevent it, and since no traveling flying types have reported some sort of huge natural disaster, I'm rather certain they are doing a good job. But there is no telling what would happen if another one of the attacks gets out of hand. Entire forests could be destroyed in minutes. He then turned to Blazefang once again. Don't let just anyone know you have the forbidden attack, Shadow Flare, he warned. And I don't think I need to tell you to stay out of the way of that army. We need to get out of this cave, fast, Redclaw interrupted. For all we know, there could be Pokemon from the army that know of the exits. From what Blazefang said, their leader Cyclone is willing to do pretty much anything to get Blazefang on his side, or kill him and take Shadow Flare for one of his own followers. I wouldn't be surprised if they tried to ambush us. Blazefang, however, wasn't listening. 2 phrases that Shade had said stood out clearly in his mind. Forbidden Attack Death Freeze was used by an Ice-type Pokemon. Only a season ago. The Houndour froze. Only a season ago. That had been around the time when Articuno left. There is an exit the army would not find it easy to get to, even from the outside, Shade told Redclaw, not noticing Blazefang's look of sudden panic. Though you will need the help of one of the water types in this cave. Mystic might be able to carry you through the water, but it will be no easy task. Even at her fastest speed, you'd be holding your breath for a long time. Blazefang wasn't listening. He thought back to what Shade had said, his mind numb. The Weavile had seemed like he had been avoiding mentioning what Pokemon had used the attack. Was that because he didn't want them to know that a legendary had fallen victim to it? Blazefang mentally shook himself. No, he thought. It was just a coincidence. Articuno had to be smarter than to use that attack more than a few times, if he ever found it. But if he hadn't known what it was... I suppose that's something we'll have to risk, Redclaw replied, interrupting the Houndour's thoughts. If it's the safest way out, I'd rather we go that way than have to risk the army finding us. But first we have to find our friends. Do you think... I can ask some of the Golbat here to search, Shade replied. But remember, the cave is very large. It could take a bit of time. You're welcome to stay here while you wait. The Weavile stood up and led them back through the tunnel and into the largest cavern, where they were told to stay until their friends were found. Blazefang, who had nowhere to go, chose to wait in the cavern as well, at the side opposite from the others. He was still thoroughly shocked at the thought of Articuno being a possible candidate for the owner of Death Freeze. Eventually, he managed to shake the thought from his mind. Or at least, nearly. Articuno wouldn't have done that. He couldn't have found a forbidden attack. Right? As soon as he had seen Thunder vanish into the dark tunnel, it no longer occurred to him to try and move up to the small cavern where Snowcrystal and Rosie waited. It was only their shout that brought Stormblade to his senses again. Forcing himself to focus only on the task ahead, he made his way up to his two friends, almost forgetting the pain of his wounds. When he sat down in the safety of the cavern above, there was nothing more to distract his thoughts. Thunder was gone. For a moment, he sat completely still, gazing into the dark water below, as if he expected Thunder to somehow manage to swim back to them. Then he turned to the others. I need to go look for her, he told them. In that moment, Snowcrystal saw a bit of his old self returning to the look in his dark blue eyes. She remembered the strong Scyther who had sought to protect her and the others. The Scyther who was able to defend and help. She had to remind herself that that Stormblade was long gone. Reluctantly, she opened her mouth to speak, but Rosie spoke up first. "Are you crazy?" the Ninetales cried. "You'd get yourself killed." That statement seemed to come as a shock to the Scyther, and the fire in Stormblade's eyes died down to be replaced with the same misery and helplessness the others were used to seeing. "Oh," he mumbled, as if just realizing it. "You're right." Snowcrystal stood still, looking from him to Rosie. She wanted to help him. She wanted to help them both. But there was nothing she could do for Stormblade. At that moment, she finally realized what it really meant for him to be injured by Blazefang's forbidden attack. If what Spark had learned about them was true, it would never heal. Not ever. Stormblade was a young Scyther, and yet he would never again be able to fly or hunt or live as a normal Pokemon. He would never again have practice battles for fun with other Scyther, even though battling meant so much to them. He would never again be able to help or protect those he cared about. He would feel like he was only hindering them. Even though she had known this all along, it seemed to her as if only now was she realizing what this truly meant. What did Stormblade really have to live for anymore? She looked up to see Rosie, peering over the edge of the rock and down into the swirling black water, looking both worried and terrified. Quietly, she walked over to the Ninetales. "I'll look for her," she whispered quietly. Rosie was the first to speak. "What?" she asked, looking at the growlithe with a shocked expression. "How would you—" "I'm going to find Thunder," Snowcrystal repeated, looking the Ninetales sternly in the eye, making it clear that she would not be convinced otherwise. "I have my fire attacks and my crystal to light the way," she explained. "I want you two to stay here. Don't leave this place. I'll find my way back." "How?" Rosie replied. "You're not going into the river, are you?" she asked with a hint of panic. "Not if I don't have to," Snowcrystal replied, as she jumped onto the thin stone ledge leading down to the larger cavern by the river. "Stormblade," she added, turning her head to look at him. "Watch over Rosie. Make sure you both stay safe." She then continued to make her way down the ledge. Rosie's eyes narrowed. annoyed that Snowcrystal was telling Stormblade to watch over her, but she said nothing. Snowcrystal was glad that Rosie didn't reply. She had wanted to give Stormblade some sense of feeling important, though she was not sure if it had worked at all. When she reached the big cavern below, she turned and faced the swift, dark river. Her eyes scanned the walls on either side, a small flame wheel lighting up the area. At first, she saw nothing, but then a small, narrow ledge, half hidden by shadows and leading down toward the water, caught her eye. Letting the fire die out, she let herself be guided by the light of her crystal and stepped onto the ledge, beginning to walk steadily along it. It was frighteningly narrow. Even a Pokemon of her small size would have trouble walking across it. Only her experiences scaling steep, rocky mountain cliffs kept her calm and steady as she slowly walked across. She glanced up with a small, hopeful smile at Rosie, who was peering down from above. Then, with a deep breath, she walked along the ledge, into the tunnel, and plunged herself into darkness. Thunder attempted to twist free, but, with her arms pinned tightly against the rock by the creature holding her, she was unable to move her sides, so she did the next best thing, and sank all of her fangs into the Pokemon's scales. She could feel the larger creature flinch, but it did not move. She was trying to think of anything else she could do to get it to release her, when the second creature spoke up. "Wait," the voice said. "This Pokemon can't fight us. It's injured." There was a pause, and the same creature asked, "What do you think it is, Mystic?" The largest of the Pokemon slowly drew back from Thunder, who noticed that the light she had seen further upriver was coming closer. Instantly ready for any sort of surprise attack, Thunder staggered upright, watching the Pokemon move closer and reveal itself to be a lantern, an electric type. Her whole body tensed, eyeing the first two Pokemon who had come across her. As the lantern moved closer, the light from the glowing orbs on his long antenna illuminated the area. Thunder was staring straight at a large Milotic and a Lapras. The Milotic was much bigger than Thunder had thought they should be. Its massive serpentine form seemed to tower over her. The light from the lantern reflected softly off the graceful Pokemon's pearly white scales. To Thunder, it almost looked beautiful. The Scyther stood glaring while the three Pokemon stared at her strangely, as if they didn't know what she was. The Lapras, who didn't seem to have trouble staying still in the swiftly flowing river, looked at Thunder curiously, but kept her distance. The Milotic turned to the other two Pokemon. "I don't know," she said slowly. "I've never seen it before, but it's obviously no water type." She then looked at Thunder. "Hello," she stated calmly. "My name is Mystic. This is River," she added as she motioned to the Lapras. She then waved her tail toward the lantern. "And this is..." With lightning speed, Thunder darted forward, close enough to the edge of the stone ledge to swing both sides at the Milotic. Mystic narrowly avoided having her neck sliced open as she quickly jerked back. "Not a very friendly Pokemon, is she?" the lantern muttered as the three drew back from Thunder, far enough to be out of range. "Well, I don't blame her," River the Lapras said with a glare at the lantern. "Mystic did attack her, and probably hurt her worse. Plus, she's trapped here." She turned to Thunder, trying to look friendly, and said, "I can take you to a safe place. You can ride on my back. It won't take very long." "Go away!" Thunder screamed, backing away from the edge of the rock and crouching down in the shadows away from the lantern's light. The three water types looked at each other in either worry or confusion. Mystic sighed and turned away. "Let's leave it alone then," she said smoothly, "if that's what it wants." The Lapras turned to Thunder again, quietly. "I really think you should let me take you to a safer place," she said softly. "The others won't hurt you." Thunder wanted nothing more than to show the Lapras that she wasn't the weak Pokemon it seemed to think she was. But now that she thought about it, she needed to get away from the river to find a way out of the cave. And after all, if the Lapras tried to trick her, she would be riding on her back. and Thunder was very capable of giving her a slash to the neck if she was threatened. Fine, the Scyther spat reluctantly. Take me to a place where I can leave the river and find my own way out. As the Lapras moved closer, the Milotic hissed a warning. Careful, River, she warned in a smooth but wary voice. That Pokemon is dangerous. All she wants is to get out, River told her. I don't think she belongs in this cave. She then turned to Thunder again, trying to smile. Well, come on. A few moments later, and Thunder was crouched down on the Lapras's spiny gray shell as the large Pokemon sped through the water, guided by the light of her lantern friend from up ahead. Mystic swam gracefully behind them, and Thunder glanced warily back at her every few seconds. Her sides were by her sides, but her whole body was tensed, ready to attack the Lapras's neck or head at any sign that these Pokemon were about to try and harm her. Every so often, River would ask her questions. What is your name? What are you doing here? How did you get those wounds? She ignored all of them. She wanted to get away from these Pokemon, and as soon as possible. The journey, though it felt like hours to the injured Scyther, really only lasted a few minutes. Though, when the water Pokemon stopped, Thunder noticed the cavern she had ended up in was colder, and she could not help shivering. River swam calmly up to the riverbank. There. You're safe here, she told Thunder in what the Scyther thought was a too sweet voice. Without hesitation, the Scyther leapt off her back and onto the rocky ground, holding back a cry at the pain that surged up her leg. Instinctively, she put her scythe to the ground to steady herself, but that only sent pain scorching through her newly injured shoulder. Seeing this, River looked concerned. You're hurt bad, aren't you? The Lapras asked, squinting through the semi-darkness. No, Thunder growled. Leave me alone. She's obviously not an inhabitant of this cave, Mystic told River with a disapproving glance at the Scyther, while her lantern friend nodded. Do you remember the way out? River asked the Milotic. Maybe you could help her. I only know of one way out, Mystic replied, and it would not help her. One can only get there by swimming underwater, and she wouldn't be able to hold her breath that long. Now River and Whirlpool, come. The savage creature wants to be left alone. The Milotic and lantern swiftly turned and vanished, leaving the cave almost dark, the only lighting coming from some dimly glowing pale green and blue crystals. Thunder couldn't tell if River was still there, and really, she didn't care. When she finally chanced a glance back, there was no sign of the Lapras. With a sigh, she lay down, telling herself that no random stranger Pokemon would have a reason to help her without expecting anything in return. She had been right to tell them to leave. Quietly, she lay down, ignoring the pain from her wounds. She decided she would rest a while, then find her way out of the cave. She felt exhausted. Maybe, she thought, she'd even be able to sleep for a while. Thunder's attempts at sleep were suddenly interrupted by a large splash as River surfaced from the water again. The Scyther stood up, watching the Lapras set a dead Goldeen by the edge of the river. River looked at Thunder uncertainly, watching the Scyther, who was staring at her angrily. The Lapras had not known what species of Pokemon Thunder was, or what she ate, but judging by the fact that the stranger had two fangs jutting down from her mouth, the water type assumed she had to be a carnivore. I brought you some food, she told Thunder hesitantly. I'll just leave it here if you want it. She quickly turned and left, not wanting to startle the Scyther any longer. Thunder did not move, even after the Lapras left. She waited for a long while, wondering if it was some sort of trap, before she couldn't take her hunger anymore, and warily limped to the edge of the river and picked up the prey, bringing it back to safety. It didn't take her long to finish eating it, and after she was done, she stood up, looking for a tunnel to walk into. She felt surprisingly stronger. Without a backward glance, she turned and limped into the nearest tunnel, glad to leave the river behind. From a distance, the Lapras watched her sadly, then turned and dove back into the water. Snowcrystal couldn't stop herself from shivering, though not from cold, but from fear. The tunnel was dark and damp, and the rocks below her feet were slicked wet with frigid water. Further along, she found the going easier, as there were several large boulders by the riverside to climb. But the further she went, the more worried she became. There was no sign of Thunder anywhere. No scent or any other indication that the injured Scyther had made it out of the water. Though Snowcrystal wasn't usually bothered by cold, she found the chilly rock tunnel threatening and oppressive. She didn't know how well a thin, weak, and hurt Scyther could stand up to the cold. Taking a deep breath, she kept going. Thunder's newfound strength hadn't lasted long. She hadn't gotten far, and already she felt the exhaustion and dizziness she had experienced before returning. Nevertheless, she forced herself to take one shaky step after another, ignoring the drops of blood that fell to the ground from her shoulder and whichever of her other wounds happened to be bleeding at the time. She felt weakened, completely drained of energy, as if she had just come out of one of Master's arena battles. She wanted nothing more than to lie down and rest. And why couldn't she? Somewhat unnerved at the fact that the realization that there wasn't anyone to force her to keep going hadn't come until now, she looked around quickly, spotting a sheltered corner in the small cavern she was standing in. With a lurching, painful stride, she made her way over to it. By the time she reached the sheltered spot, her strength left her completely, and she crumpled in a senseless heap beside the still gray walls. Snowcrystal stood peering over a steep ledge, watching the river flow swiftly downwards into another tunnel. Carefully, she dumped down from the rock formations jutting from the cave wall and landed carefully on the stone riverside below. The space between the water and the cave wall was wider here, and she could see tunnels veering off to the sides. As she was about to follow the river, she faintly noticed a familiar scent. Thunder! Turning around, she followed the scent carefully into one of the tunnels. It struck her as strange that she hadn't noticed it by the river, but she realized that Thunder could have found a way out elsewhere and wandered through the tunnels for a while. With the scent getting stronger, Snowcrystal dashed forward and almost stumbled upon the limp form of the Scyther, who now lay against the wall. Shocked, Snowcrystal approached her carefully, wondering if she had gotten hurt worse. She nudged the side of Thunder's head, and when the Scyther didn't respond, the growlithe whined softly, curling up beside her and feeling both greatly relieved and deeply worried at the same time. She decided to stay there and wait until Thunder was strong enough to make the journey back to the others. Snowcrystal hadn't waited long when Thunder started to stir, her eyes opening slowly as she looked around. Upon seeing Snowcrystal, the Scyther jerked away from her. "What are you doing here?" was all Thunder could manage to say, though her voice sounded strained and weak. Snowcrystal quickly stood up and backed away to give Thunder some space. "I went looking for you," she told her calmly. "Rosie and Stormblade are waiting. Do you think you could fly back to where we were once you're feeling better?" "I feel fine," Thunder lied, getting unsteadily to her feet. "I don't think so," Snowcrystal told her. "You need to rest." "We can rest when we get back to the others," Thunder replied quickly. "You'll never make it in your condition," Snowcrystal told her, annoyed. "Just rest for a little. Everyone needs to rest sometimes." "I know that," Thunder shouted irritably, though, surprisingly, she sat down without further argument. "But I won't stay here for long," she told Snowcrystal firmly. Snowcrystal sighed in relief, glad that she'd gotten Thunder to listen to her, at least for a little while. She only hoped that the Scyther would be strong enough to fly back to the others. After all, she looked as if she could pass out again at any moment. It was no secret that Thunder's wounds were severely weakening her, and the energy she used to hide that weakness was gradually failing. Snowcrystal waited longer than she thought Thunder wanted to, but the Scyther said nothing, and Snowcrystal wondered if she was secretly glad of the chance to rest more. She noticed with unease that Thunder had injured her shoulder, the one that the bullet had struck. She began to wonder just how long they should wait after all. However, her decision was made for her as Thunder suddenly stood up, spreading her tattered wings. "Okay, let's go," the Scyther told Snowcrystal quickly, and then limped to the edge of the river and flew unsteadily above it, looking as if she could barely manage to keep from falling into the water. Snowcrystal followed uncertainly, stepping on the wet stone ledges again as she followed Thunder, silently willing her not to lose strength and fall into the river again. Luckily, Thunder managed to make it to the rocky ledge near where they had first reached the river, surprisingly quickly. Exhausted, the Scyther turned to lick her injured wing. Thunder! Rosie's excited shout made Thunder jump, and she turned her head to give the Ninetales a loathing glance. Rosie, however, didn't notice. Stormblade, it's Thunder! Snowcrystal found her! Rosie and Stormblade had appeared from another tunnel, one that led right down to where their friends were. Snowcrystal jumped onto a rock closer to the river's edge where Thunder was. Stormblade peered down from the rock he was standing on and looked at Thunder with first relief, then concern. Thunder? You're alive! What happened? He was interrupted as Rosie shoved him gently aside. You don't want her yelling at you again, do you? She asked him, looking annoyed. You're probably just making it worse. However, Stormblade barely noticed. After Thunder managed to stagger painfully along the rocks and into the small tunnel, Stormblade limped closer to her, only to be pushed aside roughly as she walked past. Snowcrystal appeared next, watching the Scyther with a worried expression. Let's all rest now, she told the others, hoping Thunder wouldn't think she was deciding that just for her. We can try to get some sleep, then we can keep going. Sounds good to me, Rosie yawned, lying down by the wall of the cave and curling her Ninetales around her. Without another glance at the others, Thunder lay down as well. She did not expect to fall asleep, though, while she would never admit it, she felt as if she couldn't take another step. Her wounds felt as painful as if she had just gotten them. Trying to push any thoughts of exhaustion to the back of her mind, she closed her eyes. You know, you don't have to hide everything all the time. Hiding just makes things worse. Furious, Thunder opened her eyes to see Stormblade standing there, leaning on his sides for support, like he usually did. Leave me alone, Thunder growled, her eyes narrowing. Stormblade didn't seem surprised at her reaction, but he didn't leave. I just want you to know that I will do whatever I can to help you. Go away, Thunder muttered angrily. Look, when we get out of this cave, Stormblade began, I might know of some herbs that could... You're not helping. But Will you just leave me alone? Thunder shouted, making Snowcrystal and Rosie look up. Right now, all you're doing is preventing me from resting. And what could you do to help me anyways? You can't even take care of yourself. You're completely helpless. Stormblade looked down at the floor to avoid meeting Thunder's gaze. I'm sorry, he told her, backing away. I'll leave you alone. But remember, if you ever need any... Just go away, Thunder growled back, turning away from Stormblade as he hobbled back to the others. To her relief, no one tried to say anything to her. Good. She didn't want to think about it anymore. A while later, Thunder awoke feeling confused. She barely even realized that she had fallen asleep. Even though she still felt terribly weak, she didn't feel quite so bad now. She turned her head, noticing Snowcrystal standing above her. What is it? She muttered in annoyance, but she didn't feel like yelling anymore. Snowcrystal was smiling, which surprised Thunder. Some Golbat are here, the growlithe told her happily. They can take us to the others, and they know a way out. Outside the cave, the tall grass swayed with the night breeze. A group of Pokemon walked by, their paws hardly making a sound as they warily glanced around them. One of them, a Lucario, shivered as he stared at the dark, dank entrance to the massive cave. Still no sign of that Blazefang Houndour? He muttered irritably. How long does Cyclone expect us to wait here? As long as it takes, another Persian replied. Now shut up. I say we leave this place, the Lucario muttered. I've seen what Cyclone does to some of his followers. He's not the type of Pokemon I want to be serving under. No one's around. Let's desert him. And run into one of the other groups? A Ponyta replied. They're all over the place, waiting for that Houndour to show himself. Do you want to be reported to Cyclone and be dealt with by Solus? The Lucario muttered something incoherently and focused his gaze drowsily on the cave entrance again. Well, I sure hope we don't have to stay here much longer. When's the other group going to take our place? Morning, the Persian replied. Now keep still and watch for any sign of movement. One of us will find the Houndour. Sooner or later. The 3 Pokemon moved into the shelter of the bushes, lying in wait by the cave exit, just as the other groups were waiting by the many places where one of the cave's tunnels reached the surface.